Welcome! NOAA has just released its October of 2020 Global Climate Report, and this video is a short summary of that report. Well, we have lots to discuss today. First, October of 2020 was the fourth warmest October on record. La Nina conditions are present. It is a very strong La Nina, and that will likely affect most of the world's weather. The very active Atlantic hurricane season continues. And interestingly, Antarctic sea ice is at a record low, while Antarctic sea ice is above average for the first time in about 5 years. First, let's talk about temperatures. As I said before, globally, October of 2020 was the fourth warmest on record. However, that represents a 0.1 degrees centigrade drop from this time last year. The land and the ocean were both ranked fifth warmest, but were drops of 0.19 and 0.08 degrees centigrade from last year. The Northern Hemisphere was ranked the fourth warmest October, being 1.07 degrees centigrade above the 20th century average, again a drop of about 0.1 degrees centigrade. Similar drop was experienced in the Southern Hemisphere, but it was ranked ninth warmest, and that is as you might expect if we have a strong La Nina going on in the southern Pacific Ocean. That makes it 430 consecutive months with the temperature above the 20th century average. That means you must be over 36 years of age in order to experience a month that was even the average temperature of the 20th century. And you should remember then that the 20th century had quite a considerable amount of global warming during it, particularly during the latter half. Now let's take a look at the distribution of those temperatures around the globe. In North America, most of Canada and the central part of the United States were well below average. Meanwhile, the western states, the eastern states, and Alaska were well above average. In Europe, the most western parts of Europe were slightly below average, whereas Central Europe and Northern Europe was well above average. And also Siberia remains a hotspot that has been that way for most of this year. Central Asia and China were below average, whereas India and the surrounding countries were above average. Australia was a bit of a mixed bag. Africa was above average, and so was South America. That latter is surprising with all that cold water off its western shores. That is La Nina, which is a cooling of the southern Pacific Ocean as the westerly trade winds strengthen and well up cold water from the depths of the ocean. There's also a strange cool area off the southeastern coast of South Africa, and you'll notice now that stretches all the way around the Antarctic coastline and probably accounts for the increase in Antarctic sea ice that I mentioned earlier. Now, one thing to note here is that the baseline for these temperatures is the average from 1981 to 2010. That's a 30-year period. Now, that period also contained a great deal of global warming. Unfortunately, that last type of map does not show you whether any of those temperatures were record highs or record lows. This one, the percentiles map, does. It indicates record cold temperatures by dark blue. You can see there is at least one pixel on here that is that way, and record highs by dark red, and there's nearly 80 pixels on here that show record warm temperatures. This is measured with respect to a baseline from 1880 to the present time. So this is a different baseline from what's used for the anomalies maps. I've entered the ranking of October 2020 onto this matrix here. And as you can see, 2020 is still on a pace to be the second warmest year on record, just behind 2016. Let's take a look at the upper atmosphere, and for that we appeal to the satellite data. First, there's lower troposphere, which is at an altitude of about 4 kilometers. And we look at data from the University of Alabama, Huntsville, and remote sensing systems. UAH ranked October as the second warmest October on record, RSS as the third warmest on record. and the overall trend is 0.19 degrees centigrade per decade, which is remarkably similar to that of the surface of the Earth. The mid-troposphere was the fourth warmest according to UAH, and the same for RSS, but it has a somewhat slower increase in temperature rate of 0.14 degrees centigrade per decade, which you'd expect because it is higher up at about 7 kilometers. The stratosphere, which is much higher at 17 kilometers, is actually cooling, and both of them ranked it as the coolest October ever measured, and the cooling rate is 0.28 degrees centigrade per decade. Now here is something that's always controversial, and that's the amount of sea ice there is in the Arctic. Now this should not be confused with the amount of ice that's on Greenland, because that's the ice cap. This is ice floating on the top of the Arctic Sea. In October of 2020, it reached an all-time record low, and that continues a record of 20 successive years with below average sea ice. It's showing a decline in sea ice of about 10% per decade, so that's 1% a year on average. That's quite an alarming rate. Now let's take a look at the Antarctic situation as far as sea ice is concerned. And we're in for a bit of a surprise here, that after 4 years of being below average, the Antarctic sea ice has suddenly gone above average. That's the exact opposite trend as to what is happening up in the northern hemisphere, and there may be some explanation for that in the fact that we have La Nina going on in the southern Pacific Ocean. But anyway, for October of 2020, this was the 12th highest value of sea ice on record. As I've mentioned, we're in a La Nina at the moment, and it looks, according to the models, as though that La Nina is going to deepen into quite a strong La Nina at a level of 0.15 on this index here. However, it seems that La Nina will be short-lived, returning to ENSO neutral conditions in April or May, and possibly even going into an El Nino towards the middle or end of next year. And at that point we could expect quite some significant warming going on. The crazy North Atlantic hurricane season continues. We've had a record season with 31 storms so far, 30 of which have been named. That included 12 hurricanes and 5 major hurricanes. Now major hurricanes are category 3 or higher. We've had a record number of landfalls in the United States, and in this month of October we had 5 new storms, 1 tropical storm and 4 hurricanes of a category 4, 3, 2 and a 4. So that was 2 major hurricanes in that time. For those hopefully few people that still believe that the sun is going to cause a major cooling in the next few years, I have some bad news for you. Solar activity is increasing. It's been a month since we had a spotless day, which is a long time since that has happened. We've had several major sunspot regions cross the sun. Here's an example to the right here, and you can see that some of those spots are much larger than the Earth. And we've had 35 flares in the last few weeks. That's the largest number of flares in the last 2 years. Here you can see an X-ray plot of those flares. All of them have been C flares, unfortunately. I was hoping we'd get an M flare, but that apparently is not in the cards. So in summary then, La Nina will cause temporary cooling effect on the globe, at least through the spring of 2021, and after that there may be a rapid warming. Interestingly, the Antarctic and Arctic sea ice patterns are going in opposite directions, possibly as a result of that La Nina. And the sun is becoming more active, and the new cycle is well underway, which gives me pause and thinking that we may well be underestimating the size of this upcoming cycle. It may be much larger than some people have said so far, particularly the NASA NOAA forecast. So until next time, stay safe and goodbye.